Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Devin Valencia, and today we're going to talk about how you can use ServiceNow BCM and operational resilience to develop these service maps. There's a lot of challenges that arrive from this type of effort, but one thing that is certain is you don't want to do these things in a bubble. So what I mean by that is a lot of times you'll have these service maps developed either from strictly the IT team and all their CSDM efforts, or from the risk and compliance team and all their efforts. But there's a better way to do this. We've found a lot of success implementing these service map using the best source of truth, application and process owners. You might not be familiar with BCM, but one of the first stages with the program typically is doing an impact analysis. One of the most critical pieces of doing that impact analysis is defining what your dependencies are as a process owner, as an application owner. I'll show more shortly, but essentially we can use these assessments directly from those owners to develop our entity hierarchy, or what we'll ultimately use to develop these service maps. One last thing before we get started, don't forget to check the link out below to see if you qualify for our rapid deployment model so you can get set up with BCM in minutes, not months. All right, now that we got all of that out of the way, there's so much to get into, so let's dive into it. Okay, getting right into it, I have my very technical documentation pulled up, and it'll go over the high level what we need to set up for us to be able to enjoy the resilience maps and these diagrams and effectively the entity hierarchy. So first we need to define our scope via the BIA templates. This will be the primary elements that we're looking at, which are processes, services, exactly business services, and the applications. You can go further, you can go less further, and then their dependencies, right? So what are the other types of items that they can depend on? Then we're gonna set up the pillars. After that, we'll get the entity types set up, and then the entity classes. And from there, we'll set up the entities. You could do this either the entity type filter or manually, like I do here for the demonstration. And then of course, we'll have to make sure that we get the entity type associated either way. Then adjust the node configuration so that we're actually able to see what we're looking for here. And then we'll just do a BIA for our process, our services, and show you what the map looks like. Okay, so let's start off by defining our scope. So our scope is composed of what our primary element assessments are, and then what their dependencies are. So in our case, we care about business processes, business services, and application services. And then for each of these, we're saying, hey, we care about these type of dependencies. Some setup required here to make sure that you can define these dependencies and these BIA templates. But just know if you have BCM set up, you want to set up these BIA templates. So once you know what your type of focused assets are and what their dependencies should be, and you've got it all together in BIA templates, the next thing we'll want to do is set up the pillars. Fortunately, there are pillars that we can use out of box. And the way you get here is just by going to the menu and just typing in pillars and going right to pillars. What's great is we have these pillars that we can use. And for our demo instance here, I just use mostly the existing ones, but you can adjust them as needed. The third step is to set up the entity types. So we'll go up here, we'll go to our entity types, and there's several ways to get there. I'll just go there via this way, through a favorite I have. And with these entity types, you can likely use the ones that already exist from your demo data import or create new ones. So we'll go into facilities here. And the important part with our entity types is that the pillar is referenced, and those pillars are available to select as a drop-down option. Just as a word of advice, in this demonstration instance, I'm using labels in a one-to-one type of framework, but there is a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to organize this. It's all dependent on the organization's policies. So with that said, our pillars, our entity types, and our entity classes, which I'll show next, will all have the same name, but there's different ways to do it. But essentially, what is required is that we have entities, and you could do so via the filter, or you could do so manually. So I'll show you an example of the ones I defined manually. Just a recommendation overall, would not recommend doing it manually. It can be very tedious. I would recommend using the entity type filter, but for demonstration purposes, we can do it manually. For example, we have application X with pillar technologies and class application. And I'll show you the entity type. The entity type is applications. So the critical piece here was setting up the entities, which is the fourth and fifth piece, is that you need to make sure you're referring to an existing record. It'll make more sense shortly, in that you have a class, right, as it's required here. And class is likely only something you'll see when you have advanced risk assessment enabled. Again, I'm doing a one-for-one type setup, right? And the dependency types that I've identified and the primary types I've identified have the same name as the entity types. Those entity types also have the same name as the class. There's 100 different ways to do it, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So now that we've gone through steps 1 through 5, where we have our entities with their classes, we have the entity types, we have all these entities to use, let's go ahead and do the last piece of setup. Last piece of setup is to get the node configuration to show up the way we want it to. So we're going to go ahead and click on the menu here and type in node. We can go to main node configuration. A couple different ways to get here, but we'll kind of isolate to show the ones that are for entity. We'll do top to bottom. Then you'll see there's 2 types of configurations. We'll go ahead and just look at the one that shows entity pointing to the right. And the key piece here is that the relationship piece is not in place. So there's a default relationship which restricts which types of assets can show up as a node on the resiliency map. For our purposes, we don't want to restrict that. It's very point and click to remove, just like a filter builder. So we'll go ahead and just remove that. I don't have it in there anymore, but you'll see it when you go here. Okay, now that we've got everything set up, what we're going to do now is actually go to the BCM workspace and show you some BIAs. So I'm in my BCM workspace. I'm going to go to the approved ones because I've already done these, and I'll show you process first. In here, you'll see that there's several different categories for the types of dependencies you'll want to identify as a process owner. Right? So the idea for BCM, at least within ServiceNow, is that you're allowing process owners, allowing app owners to go into the workspace and complete these assessments for the processes and apps that they own. Going back to the BCM workspace, we'll look at another type of BIA. So this time we'll look at it for service. We'll look at our dependency assessments. And for services, I've identified dependencies on business processes, facilities, vendors, and support members. Again, you could do any number of dependency types. And so you'll see here that I have the business process 1 that we did a BIA for earlier as a dependency. Then for the last piece, we'll want to check out the application TIA and its dependency assessment. And for that, we've identified application as dependency, data centers, and servers. So one really nice feature of this whole process, I'll put this back into the draft state and refresh my page here. One really nice piece is that we have this update dependencies feature. Right now, I don't have any mappings for these items, but this is part of what makes this setup so powerful. So there's a couple of things to consider here. So we have the ability to automatically have dependencies update on a regular basis from the CMDB into these BIAs. And then effectively, when these BIAs are approved, those relationships are mapped into the entity hierarchy automatically and under the structure that you've set up via the BIA templates. So super powerful stuff. You're unifying data that's already there without compromising on the data integrity. One last thing to note is the only types of items that will make its way to the service map are those dependencies identified for approved BIAs. So if your BIA is not approved, it will not make its way to that dependency map. So let's go ahead and get this one approved. Fantastic. Now we have our 3 approved BIAs, one for the process, one for the service, and one for the application. Think of the service at the top level, think of the process as the middle level, and then the application service as the supporting piece for the process. After we've done our BIAs and gotten them approved, the last thing we have to do is check out our awesome map. We'll do this by navigating directly to the Operational Resilience workspace. So when you're in the Operational Resilience workspace, I like to go from the list. I'll go to my business services. And the business service we did a BIA for was named Dispute Services. So we'll click into that. And then click into our resilience map. And that's how you get your map. So now you can see how you can set up these business service maps using the entity hierarchy, but defining that entity hierarchy in a way that's natural and supportive of the system, right, as the process as a whole. So first, you'll define your BIA templates, which give you your primary and dependent, or secondary, I call it, scopes, right? What are these things that you're trying to restore or account for, right? What are the primary items, and then what can they possibly depend on? Then there's some other technical items, the pillars, the entity types, the classes, with classes being optional if you don't have advanced risk assessment. And then you set up the entities, right? So if you can't have a service map without these entities being established, if you identify a process as a dependency for a business service that you've done a BIA for, and you don't have a matching entity for it, it won't show up in the map. But as you saw, it's very straightforward on how to set up. You have to make sure the node configuration is set up in the way that you like. Some organizations don't need to see every type of dependency that you've identified. For example, if you've done a very elaborate entity hierarchy, you might not want to see everything that you don't think is relevant for auditors. Then the last piece is to let your process owners, let your application owners do their job. Let them define what they depend on, and then the rest will come. I know there's a lot of information I just threw at you, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and another video will be coming soon. Thanks.